Hello everyone, welcome to my Last of Us Part 2, Survivor difficulty, no damage, no crafting, no upgrades, no safes, no listen mode walkthrough, and this is Ellie's section of Seattle Day 2. And this is a pretty simple chapter, and there are only a few encounters on this chapter that might potentially screw you up, and it's only the final encounters that tend to come across as being very annoying, because the enemy AI tend to do turning animations a lot, or their timing on their movements can be a little different. But as long as you're being a little bit more patient with when you're supposed to move, you'll be fine. And did you see that just then? I stood in front of that window, but it prioritized the other window. There's some weird issues with the prioritization system on the windows. You're not going to notice this kind of issue with the prioritization system on the windows until you get to Abby Day 1, where you're in the forest, and then you get to that restaurant holdout, and you have to survive while Lev and Yara are opening a way for you. And the reason why you're going to notice it is if you're going to be following this walkthrough, you're going to be doing a strategy where you're going to be sitting in one room and keeping a window intact so that the enemies only come from a set number of paths, rather than going through the window, which is where you're going to be standing for the encounter. And then there's a point in the encounter where you're supposed to break the window, and if there are any enemies nearby, Abby will prioritize the enemies rather than the window, and this is a problem if you, say, for instance, get a clicker or a shambler, and you will take damage. It's very frustrating, but at the same time, it's not that big of an issue because it only affects me in one encounter, and I will never get screwed by windows anywhere else in the game. So for that section, just be very cautious when you're trying to break the window. You have to break the window at a particular point to make sure that Abby doesn't prioritize anything else except for the window, and you'll be fine. But we're just moving around this area, picking up supplies. You won't be seeing a combat encounter until a couple of minutes later. And we're going to be encountering a new enemy type, which is the dogs. And if you follow this walkthrough, you won't have to kill a single dog. I didn't kill a single dog in my blind playthrough. And overall, when it comes to the stealth encounters, the dogs aren't a problem. And the paths I've found to get past them, even if they detect your scent trail, you will have no trouble with them whatsoever. And the way they pick up your scent is, as you're moving around the environment, you're essentially leaving behind an invisible trail that if a dog walks over it, they will pick up your scent and they will start following you. The tooltips recommend you use a distraction, or you just get enough distance away from the dog. I just do the latter option. I don't bother using distractions on the dogs because I never need to. They're overall a pretty well-designed enemy. I don't really see any problems with them. Well, who knows, there might be problems with them because I've never engaged in combat with them. And I'm just glad they don't have any kind of acute sense of hearing, because that's a trait that a lot of dogs possess, and if they could hear you so easily, you would have a lot of trouble with the stealth, but I'm glad they didn't favor that option, because I would imagine it would have led to a lot of bullcrap if the dogs could hear you very easily. But this is our first encounter with the WLF on this section, and when you get over here, you're going to want to go prone, because she has a tendency of looking over to the left, and then once you get past her, start jogging and get over to this spot right here. This is very easy, and I especially like the music that plays here. The music has a really nice rhythm to it, and it has a pretty tense feeling to it, which I really like. And when you get over here, you're going to need to go prone because there is an owner and her dog right in front of you. I recommend just staying behind the cover here. I think there's a moment where she can look through the window and potentially spot you, and I wasn't thinking at the time, so you should probably take that bit of caution just in case. But you'll want to come over to this spot where I'm at, and the moment they start to path by, I'm just going to get inside the grass here. Be very careful of these two, because their pathing has a tendency of screwing up. You'll get moments where the rope will go through the brick wall, and the dog will try to go around to get back with its owner. And see, it's doing it right now. See that? Be very careful of that, and you always want to make sure you don't get too close to the dog. You kind of want to hold back and just wait for them to finish that little pathing issue, because the dog does have a tendency of picking up your scent if you move too quickly. And once you're over here, you just gotta get through the door, and it takes such a long time to get through this door, so you have to wait for the right moment where that owner and their dog are gonna be in the right spot, and no one else will spot you while you're opening the door. So the way you can tell when you're supposed to interact with the door is she kinda slows down a little bit, and that's your cue to get through this door. If you time it just right, none of the enemies will spot you while you're doing this. I mean, I am getting spotted a little bit right there, but she just completes her path, and she just stops seeing me, thankfully. And that is the end of that section. Very simple. And now I'm going to skip on ahead to an encounter that's not even classed as a main encounter. It's just the Shambler and a Runner. I mean, there are infected in another room, but I don't go to that room because there's nothing to collect. And I'm actually going to test something over here. I'm trying to see if I can instantly kill Shamblers with a melee weapon if I do a strike animation on them while they're not aware of me. Because I did that previously in my blind playthrough as Abby. I used a baseball bat and I was able to instantly kill a Shambler, and I tried doing it here, but it doesn't work. So, I don't know why I had that moment in my blind playthrough where I was able to instantly kill a Shambler using a strike animation with a melee weapon, but it was very weird. But be very careful there, do not remain close to Shamblers when you kill them, because they have a suicide explosion, and it will do damage to you. I don't know what I was thinking when I was trying to melee that Runner, but I just was very baller just then. But skipping on ahead, pick up the arrow, and there is another skirmish over here that is not classed as a main encounter. So you can just run past this whole entire section. I mean, if you do decide to run past them, you're going to have to be very careful here, because one thing I haven't explained when it comes to the sprint on this game is there is a stamina penalty on your sprint whenever you're in an area that has enemies. So you'll notice that you'll be running at full sprint for a couple of seconds, and then you'll see your character just stumbling a little bit, indicating that they're out of breath, and they only do that whenever there are enemies nearby. And the best way I can think of to move faster during that moment is to dodge, because you do gain a lot more momentum when you're dodging compared to just running normally in that penalty state. So you can use that as an alternative. I mean, you might have to use the time to get rid of the enemies before they have a chance to close in on you, because the enemies run very fast on this game. And in this room right here, there is a holster. So rather than crafting holsters in the first Last of Us, you now have the ability to find holsters in the environment, so they do not class as an upgrade, which is really nice. And this is a long gun holster, so you'll be able to use this to equip 2 long guns and have easy access to them. And then through that crack over there, we're going to be encountering our first Stalker. And the Stalkers on this game are very dangerous in melee combat because they attack almost endlessly and they gain a lot of hyper armor. And I find fighting them as Abby a little bit better because Ellie's attacks are pretty fast when she's initiating your melee attack, and because of the fact that her attacks are very fast, it means that when she lands a melee hit, I'm gonna have to deal with the delay, like the slightest amount of delay on the dodge when my melee hit lands. And that's a problem, because Stalkers attack pretty quickly. I mean, you do delay them a little bit when you do land a hit, but it's not that much of a delay, so you're gonna have to be ready to dodge them. I mean, the best way to fight Stalkers is to hit them once so that they flinch, and the best way to guarantee that is to go prone and just let them try to attack you when you're on the ground, dodge, and then attack them, because it will always be a guaranteed flinch on them. And then you gotta get behind them, hit their backs, and keep hitting them until they readjust themselves so that you're hitting their front. Stop, and then repeat the process. It's simple. I don't demonstrate it in this walkthrough, unfortunately, because I discovered it after I did this walkthrough. So bear that in mind when you're trying to use the melee against the Stalkers. And Stalkers have a tendency of grouping up together, and you cannot engage in melee that easily when there are multiple enemies around, because the melee on this game is designed for one-on-one encounters. And when you have the forest section where you're having to fend off all those Stalkers coming after you, it can be very tricky. I mean, if you can somehow get the Stalker to go after Lev, you're in luck, because then it'll be easier to deal with the Stalkers. And we have another stealth encounter right here. And this one, I was able to nail the first part of this encounter on my first try, but the second part of the encounter I had to restart because I messed up. And the first instance of doing this encounter, the patterns are slightly different. It's mainly with these guys over here, and that guy's going to go into the house on the left a lot quicker than usual. And he has a tendency of doing the turning animation, so you have to be very careful of him. And someone else is seeing me, and I don't know who, so if you're getting any moments where you're being spotted, go prone in the grass. There's a lot of grass in this area, which is helpful. And then you're going to want to come over to this fence over here, so that you can gain access to a prone space. And there's going to be a conversation that will play between 2 NPCs. And the dog is going to detect your scent trail, but he never gets here fast enough. You have plenty of time to move forward once these enemies have finished their conversation. And it takes him a bit to start off their conversation on the first instance, so you're gonna have to wait a little bit. But once the enemy says that quote there, now's your chance to move. Follow this enemy while you're prone in the grass, and I don't think this enemy ever does the turning animations. Every time I've done this, I've never seen her do a turning animation. So you're going to need to get behind the stairs over there, and then you're going to need to hide over there. And there are a couple of enemies to your right. There is a guy with a dog, and then there are a couple of enemies just patrolling. There's a garage door that's broken that you'll be able to use to get inside that building. And then you're going to need to hide over here. I don't know why I stood up just then. I think that was a mistake on my part. I think what I was trying to do was readjust myself, but then I remembered I can just do that, where if you get your character to lay on their backs, you can push forward on the analog stick after you do that, and they will readjust themselves whenever you're prone. So I'm just going to wait for this enemy to go to the right, which he's doing. That guy with the dog is on the right as well, and now is my chance to move. These enemies will not be able to spot you whenever you are using the grass as cover. But that is the end of this first part of the encounter, but then the second part of the encounter, I messed up, because I thought I could get past an enemy without having to dodge, but because of the paired animation nature of the melee on this game, when it comes to the enemies, she grabbed me, and that is entirely my fault. So it's very unfortunate that I wasn't able to get this encounter on the first try. But there's some revolver ammo in case you need it. And then this encounter right here, the moment you slide down, run. Start running, the enemies on your right will never have a chance to see you. And then, when you get over here, you need to go prone inside the grass. There's a guy and his dog on your right. And be very careful of the dog. The dog has a tendency of seeing you even when you're prone inside the grass, but it only sees you for a little bit, thankfully. And it has some weird pathing issues. Like, you see that just then? It did that turn for no reason. Like I said, the pathing on the enemies can be good, but there are times when it can be a little awkward. And now what you're going to have to do is just do a stealth kill on this guy, and this will always transition into a mandatory combat encounter, because when you get down here, there's going to be a dog that tries to attack you through a fence, but it can't, and you need a stun bomb for the sequence right now. And you need the stun bomb to stun these 3 enemies coming up. One of these enemies has a gun, the other 2 enemies have melee weapons. Throw your stun bomb over there, and you will stun these enemies. Now you need to run past them. Don't even bother trying to do the strike animation on them. And you might have to do the strike animation if they're in your way, but this was the enemy that grabbed me because I didn't do the dodge. You can run past her very easily, and then you have to dodge at a particular point so that she doesn't grab you, and then you will be able to get out of here, and that is the end of that encounter. And now we're going to do an encounter where I'm going to take mandatory damage, because after you kill these 4 enemies, the game's going to prompt you to get inside of the truck, and you're going to take damage very easily when you're in the truck, because it's an on-rail section, and you have unlimited ammo during the on-rail section, and thankfully, the damage you take during the on-rail section does not carry over into later progress, so you're going to have full health after you do the sequence. It's not going to be the same case with Abby's on-rail sections. There are a couple of on-rail sections as Abby where you're in a truck and you're on the horseback, and the damage you take during those moments will carry over, but to prepare for this, the game provides you a health kit before those moments, so you can't really complain at that point. I mean, I know a lot of people, for some unknown reason, maintain this subjective belief that if a section has mandatory damage moments, it's bad, but that is something that just doesn't make any sense. If the game's giving you a healing item before that moment that restores your health easily, why should you be complaining? Just don't take any damage during the other moments. Simple. And Serbian17 did that, unfortunately. He called those sequences bad just because they had mandatory damage moments, and moments where you take damage very easily. And I just don't see the objectivity surrounding such criticism. That's just not worth it. And look at that. That last enemy gave me a med kit. So the game's even indicating that you're going to take damage during this moment, even though it's not really necessary that they gave you a med kit because you regain all your health. So very interesting that the game does that. But you really don't need any help for these on-rail sections. So I've decided to trim that out. It's very simple. There's no real need. It's just there to be very epic. It's a nice way to introduce some cinematic gameplay while not actually compromising the overall game experience by taking mandatory damage that carries over. So now I'm just going to skip over to this part after you do some sniping with Tommy, because you're not in any danger, and it's very easy to get rid of the enemies. And then we transition over here, and there's a couple of opportunities to get some pistol ammo, and you can easily tell which rooms I'm going to because of the moments where the characters are talking. And after I pick up these 2 pistol bullets, I'm going to transition over to this encounter right here, which you have to do stealthily. If you get detected during this moment, you will have to deal with additional enemies. Not that it's a problem, because you'll be able to use Resident Evil 4 mechanics to your advantage, but just to save up on ammo, I highly recommend you do it like this, and you only have to deal with a handful of enemies. And the good news is, Joel will take out 2 enemies as stealth attacks, and he can sometimes take out a 3rd enemy if you kill the enemies in a particular way. But on this recording, he doesn't go for the 3rd enemy, so I have to do the job myself, but I don't care. This is really fun. I really enjoyed this part of the game on my blind playthrough. I originally assumed this would always go into a mandatory combat encounter whenever Joel tried to open the door, but it's not true. This is not a mandatory combat encounter. You can do this section stealthily. It's really nice. And it was during this section that I came to realize just how powerful leg shots were on this game. I just can't believe they took the time to put in such a system in. It's just wonderful design. You know, I always appreciate it when games take influence from Resident Evil 4 when it comes to feedback, because the feedback on the weapons on that game, you just cannot argue that it's easily the most realistic feedback you'll ever see from guns in games. And, I mean, The Last of Us Part 1 did have some pretty good feedback on the weapons with how damaging they were, but this game, the weapons aren't as damaging as they are in the first Last of Us, so to accommodate for this, they made the flinch animations better. And it's definitely needed because there are a lot more enemies that you're dealing with in these encounters. And right now, I'm just taking care of this clicker, and normally, after I kill this clicker, Joel is supposed to take out the runner behind this wall over here, but he doesn't go for it. So, I'm gonna have to take out this runner, but it's not a problem. And in this room, there is an opportunity to get some rifle ammo, a bat, and also the enemies will drop ammunition to prepare you for the boss fight coming up. And the boss fight is going to be the bloater. And this first bloater fight is really great because it's a gimmick fight. You have to deal a certain amount of damage to the bloater, and then you have to let it grab you so that Joe can kill it. The second bloater fight I just wish it was better designed. I mean, I was able to get it done effortlessly on the first try, which absolutely amazed me. But I just think the bloaters on this game take far too much punishment compared to their Last of Us 1 counterparts. There's no reason for them to take more punishment than their Last of Us Part 1 counterparts, considering that they're the exact same kind of enemy. And I just feel like it's a cheap artificial handicap to just artificially inflate their lethality for some really dumb reasons. It's just not the best way to make a good enemy type. But once I pick up the ammo here, I'm going to transition over to this encounter. And there are a couple things the bloater can do. So rather than having the ability to grab you immediately and instantly kill you, like it was in the first Last of Us, he now has some melee attacks. But this guy, you always want to make sure you are dodging behind him because he attacks endlessly with those melee combos. He attacks more than the stalkers. It's insane how a big enemy like him, that's supposed to convey a sense of slowness to his attacks, because that's exactly what you're expecting from a big enemy, attacks more than a stalker. It's crazy. And that's why you have to make sure you get behind him, because when you get behind him, he stops meleeing and he's forced to readjust himself. Like, you could even try meleeing him with your attacks and it does a little bit of damage, but it's not really recommended because there are many ways to get rid of these bloaters quickly. And the other attack he can do is this charge attack right here, where he roars at you, and you have to dodge to the side in order to avoid him. You can also use other enemies as a way of stopping his charge attack, so that's another really good option, and you can even use human shields as well. I'm surprised human shields work against the charge attack, but it actually does, which is very interesting. But the other attack that the bloaters can do is they can pull out a mycotoxic sack and throw it at you, but you can't stop it like you can in the first Last of Us, where you shoot all the sacks on his body, and it completely disables his ability to do so. Not that you really needed to do that in the first Last of Us, because Molotovs were so powerful against bloaters, and bloaters died very quickly, but the fact that bloaters don't die very quickly on this game is very disappointing, so he has every option at his disposal, and you have no way of stopping him from doing so, which, again, I just find it to be a very questionable design choice. But I've skipped directly to this part right here, which is just an optional area that will allow you to gain some supplies. You're supposed to use a brick here and throw it at that particular pane of glass so that you can use the rope. And that will allow you to gain access to the room that's beyond the locked door. And you can get some supplies. Oh, that restaurant right in front of me, that actually has infected. I didn't actually know this, so there is going to be a moment where I go into that restaurant thinking that there is just nothing in there because there's nothing inside this optional area, but it turns out there are infected. I never went into that restaurant on my blind playthrough, which I'm honestly surprised that I didn't. So I'm going to end up accidentally triggering infected, and they'll start to spill onto the streets. Not that they're going to be a problem anyway, because I can easily get past them. But seeing as how we have a bit of a slow moment right here before we get into some actual combat encounters, I mean, the only other big combat encounter in this area is an optional encounter where if you go inside of a building and interact with a workbench, you'll actually get attacked by deserters from the WLF. And I thought it was a really cool moment because I was not expecting it. You've gone to every other workbench on this game and never been attacked, but when you go to that particular workbench, you get attacked, and it jump scared me. I actually got scared for my life. It was hilarious, and I'm glad it captured my reaction in my blind playthrough because I thought that was a really cool moment, and I really enjoyed that moment. But as I was saying, that's an optional encounter, and I'm going to go inside of that building, but I'm not going to interact with the workbench so that I don't trigger them. And it's not a particularly difficult encounter because there's only 4 enemies, and you can easily kill the first guy because he's always going to be open to a strike animation upon first starting the encounter. Then you use a bottle on the next enemy that appears, and then you use another bottle against an enemy and just grab him as a human shield, and then take out the 4th enemy and kill him. It's very simple, so it's not a problem. But I'm just going to go off on a different tangent, and I'm going to talk about the encounter select before we get over to the next encounter involving stalkers. So, I had mentioned before that I don't like the encounter select system on this game. I think it's just very bad. It's nowhere near as good as Uncharted 4's encounter select system for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that the encounter select system negates certain encounters. So there are encounters not listed in the main encounter select system that I find to be pretty difficult. Like, I remember there was an encounter where you play as Abby and you're escorting Lev up that tower, and there's an encounter with 4 enemies that I found to be pretty difficult, but it's not listed as a main encounter in the encounter select system, so I can't replay it. And I feel like that's the case with a lot of other encounters on this game. So that's my first big gripe with the encounter select system. The second reason why I don't like the encounter select system is because the loot that you start off with when you first begin the encounter is completely different every time you restart the encounter. So you could, say for instance, have 2 sniper rifle rounds upon first starting the encounter, but then you restart and you suddenly don't have the ammunition. And it applies to your upgrades as well. Your weapons can have different upgrades, and you can also have different supplemental upgrades. So you can oftentimes get upgrades that you don't want, and when you're trying to do a no upgrade restriction for a walkthrough, you can't use the encounter select properly on this game in order to accommodate for a walkthrough. So that's yet again another reason why I don't like the encounter select system. And another reason why I don't like the encounter select system has to do with the accessibility options, because when you start an encounter on the encounter select system, it reverts your accessibility options, and I don't know why. So you could, for instance, have certain combat accessibility options enabled. You start an encounter, and they all revert back to the default positions. And I have no idea how this is possible when Uncharted 4 didn't have an issue like this. But it's just something that I don't like at all. And then my final reason why I don't like the encounter select system is because it has a couple of bugs to it. There's a hilarious bug that occurs in the encounter select system where in the middle of an encounter, you get this weird pop-up message that says encounter completed, yet you didn't even complete the encounter. I don't know why this happens with the encounter select system sometimes, but it's something that should have been rectified easily. And that pretty much makes up a vast majority of the issues that I have with the encounter select system on this game. But I've now taken the time to transition over into this building where the Stalker encounter is going to begin because there's nothing happening in the hiatus in between. And the Stalker encounter doesn't begin until we mantle over a opening that will allow us to gain access to the Stalker encounter. And the Stalker encounter is very easy, although the second part of the encounter with the Stalkers, you're going to be spending a lot of time just getting rid of the Stalkers, because the Stalkers, they have this pre-programmed system where if you try to go for the door, they just immediately attack you, and at the time, I didn't really know how to fight Stalkers properly, so I'm going to be demonstrating the improper way to fight Stalkers on this game. But this first part is very easy. All you gotta do is move slowly upon first starting this encounter, and then at a particular point, you're gonna want to sprint, so that this Stalker doesn't immediately attack you. And I'm not too sure what I'm doing right now. I think I'm trying to take this a little bit more stealthily, because you can get a stealth kill on this stalker over here, but there's another stalker across from me that will see me when you do this, so I don't know why I'm wasting my time trying to do this. They've spotted me, so now's my chance to run, and when you're running, there's always going to be a stalker right in front of you, so you're going to have to dodge and try to get behind it. Just be very careful that you don't get screwed by the attack combo it does, and when you get out this window, they will not follow you. And that is the end of the first part of the encounter, and when we move on to the next encounter, there's one clicker, and there are a lot of stalkers in this area, and the stalkers, they set up in positions where it's impossible to stealth right past them, because they set up in areas where they can see you going through the shimmy spaces. I mean, the distractions do help a little bit, but it's entirely RNG dependent, because there's no telling if all of the stalkers are going to go for the distraction, and on this recording, I do try to use a distraction, but not all of the stalkers go for the distraction, and I get spotted by one of the stalkers that doesn't try to go for the distraction, and this is it right here. And I'm able to do the strike animation on her, but it's pointless. The moment I get near this door, they're all going to converge on me, so I need to be very careful. I mean, I could be using my pistol here, but I figured I was going to be saving my pistol ammo for something important, so that's why I'm not using it at the moment. And with that clicker around, I don't want to risk going for strike animations, because the clicker will attack me during the strike animation. And this is a pretty good time to use one shell from the shotgun, and only one shell, because you need to save a lot of shotgun shells if you want to kill the bloater, if you're trying to do this game without crafting. I mean, obviously, if you're not caring about the no crafting requirement, you can get the bloater fight done with 3 trap mines and 3 molotovs, because I discovered the best way to deal with bloaters when you're using those particular pieces of equipment is you stun the bloater with the molotov, and then you place a trap mine down right next to it while it's stunned, and you gotta move very fast so that you don't get hit by the splash damage on the trap mine. And it's a really fun way of getting rid of bloaters, and it's very efficient. I mean, you still have to contend with the runners that spawn in that encounter, and from what I've been testing with the bloater boss fight, I don't think the runners are infinite. There's just way too many of them, and I don't know why the bloater needs runners to support him. I think just having like 5 runners is more than enough, and you have a pretty hard encounter, but putting in an endless supply of enemies that just feel like they don't end, I just think it's really stupid design, and it just completely makes that boss fight annoying, and it forces you to just damage race the boss in order to get rid of it very quickly. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong with the bloater boss fight if you're taking too long to get rid of it. And I've sped up this encounter right here because I spend way longer than what's necessary when it comes to dealing with these stalkers. I should just be using my pistol. I don't know why I'm not. And I'm even demonstrating the incorrect way to fight them. You know, if I could actually demonstrate the correct way to fight stalkers, like right now, look at this. I'm kind of doing it just then, although not really the best method, because you're still going to get caught by that pushing animation even when you're just attacking once, dodging, attacking once, dodging. It's better to get behind them and just attack their back. That's the best way to deal with stalkers, and I didn't demonstrate it just then, which is very disappointing. But that is the end of this really long encounter that I honestly shouldn't have made that long. But now we're going to move on to the next part, which is an encounter with the Seraphites, and it's the very first encounter with the Seraphites, and this was very intimidating the first time I did this. And it's just so different dealing with an enemy faction that doesn't speak. They instead whistle, and when an enemy faction takes that long to develop a whole new kind of way of communicating with each other without revealing their intentions to the enemies, you have yourself a really dangerous group. And I definitely feel like this enemy type is something to be feared compared to the WLF. But you're going to take mandatory damage here. Big deal. Whatever. That doesn't matter. And now you're going to have to remove the arrow that's embedded in your shoulder. And it's a new mechanic that this game has introduced, which you'll never see if you're playing the game properly. So it's a completely pointless mechanic in the long run. And it's also important that you go to this particular mantle spot, because depending on where you try the mantle, you will affect the direction the enemies will come from. So when you go to that spot, the enemies will always come from the left. And it's always important you go there, because you will have easy access to the bushes around this area, and on this side, you have a lot more accessibility when it comes to using bushes to your advantage. And what I normally do is I hug the left-hand side and I follow this enemy. You have to be very careful of her. There's no telling how far she's going to go when it comes to doing her path. And she can sometimes spot you when you're over here, so maybe I should have gone further back so that she wouldn't have a chance of spotting me. But when she turns around, I'm just going to follow her. Normally what happens is the enemies go on paths that don't allow them to intertwine with another enemy's path, which is why I find it best to follow this person, because she seems to be very distant from the other enemies, and she's going to go off to the left, and she's going to go up a mantle point, and that's another reason why I like following this person, because she takes quite a while to do her full path before she decides to turn around. And I'm very close to the end of this area, but I just have to worry about a couple of stragglers that happen to come my way, and there's one of them. So I'm going to have to proceed with a bit of caution. I'm going to wait until he comes back so that I can safely move. And he's coming my way, so I'm going to have to move a little bit more to the left, but now's my chance since he's not looking at me. And I'm still going to remain prone because the Seraphites can see you pretty easily. But once I'm behind this piece of shrubbery here, I just go back into a crouch position and then I start jogging. And there is an arrow over there. You'll definitely need it. I completely skipped it for some reason. I probably should have waited for the right moment when the Seraphites weren't looking so that I had the time to pick up that arrow. But maybe I was very confident in my ability to do the upcoming sections with just the 2 arrows that I have. And I highly recommend you have at least 2 arrows for the upcoming sections later on in the game. Because the bow and arrow, while it isn't the strongest tool, it is definitely helpful for getting rid of certain enemies, and you'll definitely need the bow and arrow for the final stealth encounter of the game, because for the final stealth encounter, the enemies have helmets, and the bow and arrow is a one-shot kill to enemies that have helmets. And I find it very interesting how that is the only part of the game where you encounter helmeted enemies. Every other part of the game, there isn't a single enemy that has a helmet on. I wonder why they decided to go with that particular decision. I mean, in the first Last of Us, there were a lot more enemies that had helmets on, even though at the same time it wasn't really needed, because your weapons were pretty strong against enemies, and most of the time you weren't really aiming for the head, and you were doing stealth attacks most of the time. So I guess that's one of the main justifications as to why this game doesn't have as many helmeted enemies, because, I mean, the enemies are already very erratic in their movements when it comes to being in the combat, so getting headshots on them can be pretty tricky, and you have the leg shots to your advantage. Of course, now that I think about it, the fact that the enemies don't die in one hit so easily on Survivor difficulty, it kind of destroys the whole purpose of having the helmeted enemies. Whereas on the first Last of Us on grounded difficulty, I could definitely understand why having the helmeted enemies was definitely needed, because the enemies died very easily from your shots, given that grounded difficulty increased your weapon damage, while also increasing the enemy weapon damage. So maybe that's another reason why the helmeted enemies don't return on this game. But we have a stealth encounter right here, and this is actually the very first demo that premiered for The Last of Us Part 2, only it has some slight alterations. So you can sprint at the beginning, and then you're going to have to stop at some point and get behind that tree so that that torch guy does not see you. He's kind of random with where he's going to be. Sometimes he's right in front of the tree, other times he's right behind the tree. But either way, you're just going to have to remain prone in that spot and start moving. Now, this right here, there is a woman right in front of you, so you're going to need to go prone inside these bushes over here. If you're crouched, she can still see you, which I find very strange. But when she goes all the way to the right, get past her, and be very careful here. There's another enemy right behind this van over here. And where she is very random, so you need to get to this spot very quickly before she has a chance to spot you. And watch out for her turning animations. If you move too quickly from this spot, she will spot you with her turning animation. And she's doing it right there. See that? I was very lucky that she did the turning animation in that direction rather than the other ones. But jump up here, and then this is actually the part where the wolf is supposed to be gutted, but they've moved him to that other area for some reason. But thank God for that, because it makes getting up here easier. Now, when you're in this area right here, you have to remain crouched, because if you are jogging up this incline over here, an enemy can hear you for some reason, and you will engage in combat, so make sure you remain crouched right here. Now what you're going to have to do is go prone inside this tall grass over here, and keep watch over the enemy that is directly above you. You need to wait until he walks away, so that you have the right opportunity to move. But you don't want to move too quickly, because there is an enemy to your right, and you have to wait until she's in the right position to move, and she also does a lot of turning animations, so you need to proceed with a bit of caution. But there is the guy who's right above you. I'm going to wait for him to move, and I'm going to keep watch over this enemy over here. She's in the right spot, but I need to move at the right moment because she's doing a turning animation, and she will spot me if I move too soon. But now is the right time to move, because she never does a turning animation at that particular point in her pathing. And you can sprint right here, and the enemies don't seem to come over to you when you get to this side of the area. Even if you break the glass here and they are aware of the noise, they never come over to this side. And something important you need to note, you need to have a bottle for this sequence. And I highly recommend, after this little event that plays where this heavy is going to throw you away, you need to restart the checkpoint, because if you restart the checkpoint, you will despawn the other enemies that support him. I don't know why they even put these enemies in. I feel like they impact the flow of the sequence negatively. I think the sequence flows better when it's just him. Because if it's going to force you into a mandatory combat encounter where he knows exactly where you are, you know, it has to flow a lot better, and you're not going to get screwed by RNG when those other enemies are active. So, just restart the checkpoint and deal with this guy. And fighting these guys in melee combat is a lot of fun. I really enjoy fighting these guys. Basically, how they work is they will gain additional hits when you deal enough damage to them. So they will start off with one hit, then they will go into a 2-hit combo, and then they will go into a 3-hit combo, and the 3-hit combo indicates that they're very close to dying. And it's very helpful making note of that, because it makes them very easy to fight. And now we will move on to the next encounter, which is an encounter against a bunch of wolves. And I'm just going to take the time to search the area for supplies, even though there aren't any supplies I really need for this walkthrough. I guess this is one of the biggest problems with doing such restrictions on a game like this. When you're just putting such restrictions on yourself, you're not really finding the need to pick up anything in the environment, and because of that, you're not finding the need to explore the environment even more. So you're kind of just going from point A to point B, and I find a lot of the enjoyment with the Last of Us series is just exploring the environments. So it kind of sucks that I'm not devoting a lot of time to exploring the environments, but at the same time, it makes it very easy to get this walkthrough out, because I'm not having to go on different tangents most of the time when I'm just going through all these areas. But there are a couple of supplies over here in case you need them. I believe you can also get some ammunition. And Weston's Pharmacy is right there. I don't know why they make a lot of nods to Weston's Pharmacy. They're really obsessed with this brand for some reason. Because Weston's Pharmacy was a brand that was in the first Last of Us, and it just reappears in this game again as a nice little nod. And there's a safe if you wanted. I mean, I don't even know half of the save combinations or how to even get most of the saves unlocked. I mean, the saves I do know how to get unlocked, I don't get that many supplies from them anyway. So, in actuality, it really doesn't matter if I'm not going for saves. It's still kind of the save experience. But you can get some useful supplies from the saves. You can even get training manuals from them. Although I believe the training manuals still spawn in other areas of the world if you don't get the training manuals from the saves, which is really nice. But I'm about to transition over to the next encounter with the WLF, and it's pretty simple. Although the AI can be very random in this part, this is one of the encounters where you're going to get screwed by turning animations the most, because, like I said before, the turning animations affect the timing on when you're supposed to move, because it affects the pathing on the enemies a lot. And it's not just the turning animations you have to worry about. The enemy placements can be different each time you restart the encounter. I mean, these first 3 enemies right here, they will always be in the exact same positions. But the upcoming enemies, they can be in different spots upon first reaching them when you restart the encounter each time. And this one right here, you have to wait until he turns and then move. There's an enemy to your left, and she has a dog. The dog is not going to be a problem because the dog never crosses your path whatsoever whenever you're making your way over to this position. But you don't want to move because there is an enemy beyond this mantle point over here, and you need to wait until she moves away, and you also need to wait for that dog and her owner to come back outside the hospital. But here comes this woman over here. Be careful of the moments where she does the turning animations, because like I said, it affects her timing on her movements, and oftentimes it can cause her to move a little bit faster than usual, or just completely skip moments where she's supposed to stand still. That's something I've noticed a lot when it comes to the turning animations. The turning animations can allow the enemies to bypass moments where they're supposed to stand still, which is very broken, and like I said, if these turning animations weren't in the game, the strategies would feel a lot more consistent, and the stuff would be a little bit more reliable. But right there are 2 enemies that patrol in different areas each time you restart the encounter, and that right there is one of the unique permutations where she is coming towards me, and she's just going to go off to the left. This guy's going to move backwards, but oftentimes he tends to look over to where you are when you're getting through this door. But that is the end of this encounter, and I'm just gonna skip the whole part where you're chasing Nora, because you're not in any danger. It's a really fun sequence, but like I said, you're not in any danger. And I'm just gonna skip on to the next stealth encounter, which is just a bunch of enemies and a couple of clickers. Obviously, you can throw a distraction and just get these enemies to fight each other, but it can be very random at times, and there is a very consistent strategy to this. So take out this guy, and then take out the person right in front of you. Upon first starting this encounter, the guy on the left, he turns a little sooner than usual, so he can sometimes spot you as you're making your way over to this person. When you restart the encounter, he doesn't see you that quickly. I'm gonna do the strike animation on there since I have no choice, but that's good because the clickers have been alerted to my position and they're actually gonna target the other guy. So I'm free to open this door, and all that's left to do now is chase down Nora and interrogate her in order to find out Abby's whereabouts. And a lot of people consider this scene to be very violent, but I need to have a big discussion on the whole idea of violence in The Last of Us Part 2 in the later videos, because I don't know why people consider this game to be the most violent game ever, when there are far more violent games out there that don't even use violence or any kind of theme. They just use it as just mindless violence, and just to remind the player that, oh, you're playing a survival horror game, or not even a survival horror game, just a horror simulator game. So it'll be a very interesting discussion to get into. But this is the end of this chapter. Stay tuned for the future chapters. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.